The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Yeah, it's Joe. Can you hear me okay?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Tyndall AFB Coastal Resilience in Support of Mission Assurance and Becoming an Installation of the Future. This is hosted by SAME's Resilience COI. I am Tamel Harbison from the SAME National Office, and I will be in the background with any technical issues you may experience. If you are experiencing any technical issues with the GoToWebinar platform, you can dial the number 1-833-851-8340. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode, and if you are dialed in, we ask that you please mute your phones. Questions for the speaker should be submitted via the Questions tab. Do this at any time during the session, but you know we will hold all questions until the end. Remember to take a look at other questions already submitted and flag those you like. This will avoid duplicates and it will allow the moderator to know which questions are most relevant to everyone. When the polls pop up, we ask that you make a selection, and then the results will be made available after everyone has voted. In the handout section, you will find this session's presentation and the PDH certificate ready for you to download. We ask that everyone complete the survey at the end of the webinar. We welcome all feedback. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the SAME's YouTube page and as well as the Resilience COI webpage. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Mr. Get Moy from Fairfax, Virginia. You now have the digital floor, so take it away.
Thank you. It gives me really great pleasure to introduce our speaker, have a few words about the subject that we're going to be talking about today. You know, the first thing we're going to be talking about is provide the context of the presentation today. Most of you, being members or participants in SAME activities, realize the importance of military installations in terms of the readiness and the support of our operational forces. The introduction of Tyndall gives you the context of today's discussion and the technical applications. Over the years, for those that have been in the business, we've always talked about energy, we've talked about sustainability. With the recent disasters, we've now talked about resiliency. And I think the speaker has combined them all to give a comprehensive package in terms of taking a look at the approach that everybody should be looking at in the future planning, programming, budgeting, design, construction of the military facilities. It's apropos that right now we're about a month and a half into hurricane season. We've already have 6 named hurricanes for this season, and in the last few years, a number of our military installations have gotten hit by hurricane. So I think this topic, when it first surfaced, I thought it was going to be an exciting one to present to folks, give chance for our speaker to talk about best practices and lessons learned that they've come across at Tyndall Air Force Base. And I think hopefully this will continue to help the community be better prepared to support our operational forces. The thing that is particularly, I think, interesting is in terms of taking a look at the nature and the natural-based coastal resiliency solutions. But also the most focused thing is, everybody talks about outreach, talks about networking and things. This is important that from the standpoint that the speaker is going to look at the stakeholder engagement and how he was able to get that engagement. the next slide, we're going to be taking a look at the learning objectives. First is, for those of you that have done business with the Department of Defense are well familiar with the UFC requirements that overlook all the work that's done at the military installations, construction, renovations, etc. You're going to learn an approach on how to pull that together with the climate directives into a coherent, resilient, and sustainable strategy to guide the installation planning. Understanding, pulling those together as we go along to make it relevant for the local stakeholders as well as communities, because things are not just limited within the gates of our military installations. We are partners with our communities. And then take a look at how the approach that was developed to engage those internal and external stakeholders. That the communication link is all the more important in terms of folks understanding what's the nomenclature, what's the language we're translating, and then understand it from the standpoint of nature-based solution in the coastal resiliency. So the next slide, this is a thumbnail sketch about our speaker today, Joe Raza. This is, as I learned in the pre-discussion, his hobby of antique book collector is just one aspect of what makes him really a fascinating speaker, interesting speaker. But he's got the credentials, we were talking about Director of Strategic Sustainability. But if you take a look at all the things that he's developed his competence and credentials in, it is all about developing the business case, developing the partnership, developing the relationships, and what are the metrics and how do you execute them. So I think I hope you will be equally impressed with Joe's presentation and gather whatever information that you can to take back to your own practices and your own work. Joe, I'm going to turn this over to you, and please enlighten us.
Well, thank you so much, Get, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to talk through this subject. It's really an exciting project, and I'm happy to be here today to talk to the group about it. We're going to talk about coastal resilience in support of mission assurance and becoming the installation of the future. That's the big topic here. In order to get you there, I want to talk a little bit about the overall program, and the coastal resilience fits into a broader strategy and a broader framework and a broader set of goals and objectives. So, I'll spend a little bit of time setting the stage with the bigger picture. And then we'll get into focusing on coastal resilience, and we do have an emphasis on nature-based solutions in that regard, and there's some important reasons why we're focusing on nature-based solutions, which we'll get to in due course. But just a little bit about the base itself. I think it's helpful to know the base is located, perhaps many of you know this already, but it's located on the panhandle of Florida in the United States. It's on the Gulf Coast. The base was built in 1941. It's got a long history of being a phenomenal training installation, and it's also supports warfighting for the Air Force. So it is an ideal location, particularly for both power projection, but for training. The aircraft can rotate, pull up, move out over the Gulf, and they're in airspace where they can do what they need to do to maintain and sharpen skills at really little to no risk to anybody else around them. So it's a very important base in the overall portfolio of installations. And so that's a little bit about the base. I think it's worth mentioning that for folks that maybe don't live in the area, that this to the east and the west of the base, it's a high tourist area. So there's a lot of tourism, and a lot of that tourism is also driven by the quality of the environment. Certainly the resilience of everything that's going around there, the economy, the tourist economy depends upon that. So, the point is simply that the base is part of a larger social, environmental, and economic fabric in the area. And that's a little bit of what it's about. So I wanted to give you a little bit of some background here. Hurricane Michael in 2018, this was a Category 5 storm that the eye of the storm went directly over the base. 155-mile-an-hour winds, just a little bit east of there, Mexico Beach, which was on national news. The surge went over 15 feet in elevation. So this was a major storm that kind of came through the area. And 100% of the assets on base were affected by this. Some were completely destroyed, others were banged up pretty badly. So the base is involved in a significant rebuild effort. It's a $5 billion rebuild program. And they're correctly so, their goal is to build a resilient, sustainable, and smart base that is going to be in support of the future mission. But then as we'll get into a little bit of the detail, what does that mean in terms of an installation of the future? What does it mean to be smart, resilient, and sustainable? But this is just one of many reasons why this is an important effort. So just a little bit on some of the flood risks. I know we have some technical folks on the call here, but on the right-hand side you can see, courtesy of Dr. Todd Bridges over at the Army Corps of Engineers, they've done some modeling. The upshot there is no surprise that the Gulf of Mexico will be getting more storms in the future, and the storms, as you know, due to climate change, they're getting more intense. But that doesn't diminish the value and the importance of having Tyndall located where it is. So, we just need to make sure that it's resilient to these kind of events. So what you're looking at here on the left-hand side of the screen is just one of several inundation models that were developed. So what you're looking at here, for those that are really technically oriented, this is a 100-year event that has sea level rise on top of it. And we're using the NOAA 2017 high projection, but it's roughly around 7 feet of sea level rise by the year of 2100. So if you take the surge and you take the sea level rise, you come up with the bar charts in the middle, which are design flood elevations for what we want to be building to. So they're different because there's the Gulf Coast, and then there's the bay behind there, and the bay has lower surge, but you're looking at 14 and 19 feet respectively for the bay and the Gulf side. So if we wanted to go more technical, we could talk a little bit about the storm. There's also rainfall modeling and stormwater modeling that's a part of this, but we're not going to get into those details today. But so you can see the 14 and the 19 become important numbers for resilience at the base. You look at the graph there, you can see, under future states, the entire airfield would be underwater during certain events. So let's just talk a little bit about the broader context here of rebuilding a base that's the installation of the future. What does that mean? All right. So if you look at these boxes on the right, always number one is mission assurance. So how are the assets positioned and put into place to support mission assurance and mission readiness? That's always going to be number one. What's also been historically true is the important regional value that military installations provide to the surrounding community, right? They're economic engines wherever they are, and as you'll see going forward, they have another value proposition to communities in terms of resilience and sustainability. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So it's recognizing the value of the past, but building on that and contributing more value go forward. Just a small little point to add to that, many of the people that work on base live in those communities around the base. So, they have interests in making sure that those things are looked after. From a technology standpoint, I think everybody would see where this is going. There's just a lot of technology out there. And so when we'll talk more about smart technology in a minute, but obviously being intentional about that, and I would say what we'll communicate today is being strategic about it, is really important, and it's a part of the base of the future. Focusing on quality of life is key. The mental health of our military colleagues is really important. So, can we create, a different design, compact development, a sense of place, aesthetically pleasing landscape architecture, and other things that will show you, like green infrastructure and things that really improve the quality of life and make the time on base really enjoyable and attractive and interesting. And those are really important principles when you're thinking about what a base of the future could look like. Energy, no surprise to this group, I'm sure, but it's about energy resiliency and making sure always, because energy assurance is mission assurance by definition. So that's really key. And how do we make sure that those systems are resilient? And then also, how about sustainability? What's their footprint look like? So resource protection, we'll talk about this obviously when we get into nature-based solutions for coastal resilience, but protecting the natural assets and really growing and restoring and growing environmental assets is also part of the strategy here. So, designing facilities, that can support multiple use. This is kind of a real estate planning, architectural consideration, just being smart about how you do that. But on financing, how do we, there always seems to be austerity when it comes to, spending, and then money comes with different constraints. And so, the one thing that we'll show you with nature-based solutions is it is a real opportunity to solicit the strategic participation and the financial participation of outside partners that have a vested interest in some of the performance of those nature-based solutions. And so it's very viable, and and it can be done under other transactional authority, we believe. So we're working on that, but I'll explain that a little bit more in the future. But the base of the future is not only interlocked with the community, but it's also looking at some of these innovative funding mechanisms. So that's a little bit of the base of the future. So again, we're still at the high altitude of what the programs are all about. The big picture at the base. We're going to get into. I want to explain a little bit of what's going on from a planning standpoint, and then we'll talk a little bit about some strategic objectives, and then we'll get into coastal resilience. But what you're looking at here is just some stuff from the master planning. So obviously the master planning, you're trying to lay the buildings out in a way that kind of aligns with that vision of the future and the workplace that we want to have, and the architectural details that matter, and bringing in the green infrastructure, a more walkable, bikeable base, those kind of things. So that kind of picks up on the architectural pieces. So then we get into like land management. How do we look at a revegetation strategy that's really aligned across the entire base, and how does those things support the aesthetics of the base, the experience of being on base, but also provide environmental benefits, resilience benefits, sustainability benefits. So we're looking at all this stuff very strategically through those lenses, and making sure that our stormwater management, as I step down to coastal resilience, the stormwater management needs to really be synchronized with coastal surge mitigation, to get the full threat reduction. And we'll get into the detail of that in a minute. And then, of course, the point for today's discussion is around coastal resilience. So, we're really looking at integrated green, gray, and natural infrastructure to accomplish that, and we'll get into the details. But there's a lot here, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the energy and power utility systems and things in a bit, but our focus is on coastal resilience. But it's just really important that you understand this broad strategy is driving so much of the planning, and not just the coastal resilience pieces. So let's talk about terms. I think a lot of folks on this call perhaps are familiar with these terms, but they're really important, and I want to just go over them quickly. So, you can think of these terms as guiding principles. You can think of them as strategic objectives. That's the way I think of them. These are objectives that really guide the planning and engineering to make sure that ultimately things that are done at the base support the vision and the mission of the base. So, but let's just kind of talk quickly about these terms. Robustness, what we mean there is the ability for a system to absorb an impact, right? Can it take a strong hit, or can it stop an impact from spreading to other parts of the system? So, that's a key thing that we look at. And in redundancy, the extent to which a system has diversity of methods to achieve what it's intended to do. That's really important. So, backup power supplies might be an example, a simple one. Multiple lines of defense in coastal, we'll talk about that in a minute, is also an example of redundancy. Resourcefulness is really the ability of a system to adapt to, impacts and things that it's experiencing. response and recovery oftentimes go hand in hand. Those terms are a little bit, less esoteric and more understandable. Response is obviously the degree and speed with which a system can enable that installation to return to mission effectiveness. And then recovery is the degree and speed at which the system can help regain that initial mission effectiveness. Recovery, in the broader installation of the future sense, we also have to put, a component in that definition that talks about how the installation can support the recovery of the surrounding community in the region, right? So that's kind of the 5 R's. And this is the U.S. Air Force, has an energy assurance program that's built on these 5 R's that I just went through. And we've taken those and applied them across all aspects of our planning. So when it comes to sustainability, a lot of the UFCs, really talk about efficiency and some architectural standards for sustainability. And, but, what we're thinking about in terms of the base of the future is really the full social, environmental, and economic aspects of sustainability. So it does include resource efficiency and reduced waste and those things. But we're also looking at, ecosystems and habitats and how we can restore, grow, and protect those, and how the relationship between these natural amenities and these enhanced and restored amenities and how they contribute to social well-being and mental health, as we've mentioned already. And then, what are the, we include in sustainability the financial ROI on those things. Obviously, that's important. And, there's a lot of cost savings that can come from really, strategic sustainability, if you will. And then how do, from a triple bottom line standpoint, how do we, get more stitched into the fabric of the surrounding community and drive shared value with the community through sustainability? We'll give you some examples of that, but these are kind of core principles that we look at. When it comes to smart technology, it's, we see it really as it's an important capability, that supports the other objectives to make you more resilient and more sustainable. So I don't see it as a standalone objective per se. It's really the value proposition that it has. So that's why we talk about technology. It really has to be done very strategically. But some of the basic capabilities that we're looking at is things that are self-monitoring and analyzing and reporting, and some artificial intelligence type things. Making sure that it goes through both the building and the utility systems. And I guess the dream there, the ultimate goal, and if you're rebuilding a base, you can do this, is how is all that integrated into a single platform. That really helps you with, achieving a lot of your resilience objectives, for example. So that's just some terms that we use. They're really important. And, you have to hold yourself accountable to these terms as you're going through and trying to take the big idea and downscale it into the different areas that you're working on, for example, coastal resilience. So let's get into the details of coastal resilience. So I think folks on the call are probably familiar with the fact that there's a lot of, executive orders and directives and legislation that basically emphasizes the importance, of, climate resilience. Climate security is a national priority, a strategic priority. And you can read a lot of these directives. This is an oversimplification for sure, but they emphasize the importance of it. But the specific ways that is achieved is oftentimes, not so clearly defined. So what we're looking at, today is trying to give you, a way that you can achieve, satisfaction of these directives, do it in a way that's not really a compliance-oriented focus, but more of a strategic value proposition to the base. But, we did think about these things, and they are informing the work, but, we've had to take it much further than what the directives typically lay out. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we just went over the terms. I think, quite honestly, the main message with this is, and just a little bit about myself for a second, I focus on strategy and planning for sustainability and resilience. And one of the disciplines that you have is you really have to take, whatever strategic objectives you have broadly, those have to be given operational definitions in the specific space that you're focused on at the moment. So that's what this is showing you here, is that with resiliency, for example, we've got those 5 R's again, but now they have operational definitions of what robustness, redundancy, et cetera, mean in the coastal resilience using nature-based solutions. What does it mean? So, we've talked about redundancy being multiple lines of defense, and I'll give you a look at what that means. the robustness piece, where these kind of the coastal wetlands, the dunes, and the other things that we're looking at, they can take storm surge impacts, they can dissipate those or significantly reduce those, so that the downstream impacts, what makes it through those defenses, if something should, the robustness requirement of the things, further downstream are going to not have to be quite as intense, because that risk will be severely diminished, significantly diminished. So that's just a strategy discipline that we impose. So the same thing you can see on the the sustainability benefits. I think if you just do a quick scan of those are all seem to be pretty logical. That a lot of these nature-based solutions enhance ecosystem functionality and habitats. The base here, there's mice and turtles that are endangered, specific species that are endangered. So we know that these coastal resilience solutions will help, help those populations, and that's a compliance requirement that the base has. They've got to improve those conditions. Some of these ecosystem habitat and T&E issues, threatened endangered issues, they're important, but different stakeholders have different perspectives on that, let's be honest. Some folks are not as in tune with the environmental as they maybe should be, and some folks are, really committed to that at all costs. But, the sweet spot is in the middle. And, what you'll see when we talk about stakeholders and partners and alternative funding, leveraging ecosystems and, and these natural solutions in support of resilience and coastal resilience, there's a huge benefit there, but those kind of things also provide environmental benefits and outcomes that are important to other organizations outside the U.S. Air Force that are willing to put money into them. So you can help, with, having the right science there, you can attract outside funding that can be brought in to help implement a lot of these solutions. So, the value proposition, is really strong on making sure you get that right. Obviously, with some of these nature-based solutions, they create these recreational amenities, both for the base and the community. As I mentioned earlier, these nature-based solutions are, really important, and the economy in those areas. It's a high tourism area. Of course, the local population is also very important, and their lifestyles are very much connected to the water and these environmental recreational activities. So there are community groups that are very interested in making sure that that stays, really in a good place. The other two things are hopefully fairly obvious, but some of these nature-based solutions, they do have lower ownership costs, and the environmental footprints are much lower. So I wanted to go through that quickly, but again, the main discipline here is how you take your big objectives and you downscale them into your specific focus area. So this is a bit of a sidebar. This probably could have been provided when I was doing the larger overview, but I included it here. But the key message is we're looking at both the vertical and the horizontal infrastructure at the base. And as I mentioned earlier, we put some design flood elevation stuff in place, these kind of standards. But, I just want everybody to know that the energy, utility, transportation, stormwater, communication systems are all being looked at through these resilience, sustainability, and smart tech lenses. And so how can we reimagine all of those systems in a way that are going to be super resilient, given its coastal location, and how can we significantly improve the sustainability performance as well? And smart tech is a big part of that overall package. I just want to make sure everybody realizes that the coastal resilience story is happening in this much bigger infrastructure and utility story, as well as all the vertical, and we're using the Miami-Dade standards, if you will, which has higher wind loadings, building risk classifications, and and some sustainability things in there as well. But I just want to maintain the larger, broader context there. So let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned earlier, the interrelationship in the land management plan between stormwater and coastal resilience. And so what you're seeing here for the super technical folks, we'll tell you this is a bit of a simplification. So it's not a literal linear diagram of flow. It's just the communication of the toolbox and how these different tools come together to reflect an overall strategy for resilience that involves both stormwater and coastal defense. So, what we're going to use trains as a metaphor today. And so you can see the treatment train for stormwater goes from the left to right, and then we'll talk about the defense train for mission assurance and security that goes from the right to the left along the bottom. So, just starting at the top there, if you think about when rain hits the buildings, you kind of get a localized treatment right at the building. You can get that through, planter islands, rain gardens, different things like that. And then you get into more of the routing side of stormwater with, linear treatment, bioswales and things like that. And then those things get collected into, different types of, stormwater management structures that can be, wetlands, constructed wetlands, provide water quality benefits, habitat benefits, and some resilience benefits. So as that water moves from the buildings down, we ultimately, with the wetland systems and the marshes and all that, we do want clean water getting into those systems. So you do get some attenuation through all those practices, and you get the water quality benefits. And also ultimately you get down to the coastal zone. So then when we think about going from right to left, it's, coastal is that first line of defense. So we've got barrier islands and dunes along the coast. Those would be your first line of defense. These kind of nature-based infrastructure elements, we kind of place them at this point on the graph, and they do provide some benefits. Those same practices can be put on the first line of defense as well. It's important to emphasize that. But then when you go to step 3, we're really looking at policy-oriented parts of the strategy. That's where the design flood elevation is coming in. So we want to make sure that the infrastructure and the buildings and everything that we're putting in are also set with these kind of risk tolerances where we want to set them. So using the design flood elevation is key there. And then ultimately, coastal resilience is not just the surge piece, it's also the wind. And so making sure your structures and everything are built and designed to standards that, can endure through the kind of wind speeds and wind loadings that we expect to see. So that's kind of how we've integrated both the stormwater pieces and the coastal defense pieces. But I did want to spend a minute to draw out some of the other attributes to this strategy that need to be emphasized. So the environmental benefits, the stormwater management benefits, and the coastal resilient benefits are there. But look at you've got reduced heat island effect. You got more shade. It's a more pleasant environment to be around. Those kind of sustainability benefits, both in terms of the welfare for people and their enjoyment of the space, and the co-benefits that you get with the environmental, carbon sequestration and, some habitat things. So you're really getting full triple bottom line performance out of this integrated model. So this is almost another look at the same concept, but when we start thinking about what tools we have in the toolbox, we have some, we kind of talked about these a little bit on the previous model, but I wanted to show you this, which is we've got different, natural and nature-based options in our toolbox. I won't read all of those to you. We're going to talk about some of the pilot studies that we're looking at with dunes and oyster beds and some of the other, vegetative features that we're looking at. But then the hybrid solutions, that can be two things, right? That can be taking a natural solution and combining it with a gray solution, so they're kind of connected to each other and working together. That's great. Or you can have, a hybrid where it's kind of like some of the green infrastructure, like a bioretention area, for example. That's using some natural functions, but it's also an engineered system, so it's a bit of a hybrid. And we really like green infrastructure solutions. And then you've got non-structural solutions, which are kind of policy-oriented things. And then you've got these more structural, traditional gray infrastructure. So a lot of the work is really, figuring out what is going to be effective, what's going to be, have the right cost effectiveness and feasibility. And so, what we're saying with this is we just need to make sure that we are not just focusing on the gray, the traditional structural options, because when you think about some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of the base of the future and all the other benefits that we want to achieve, having a more nuanced and sophisticated toolbox is really important. And over time, we hope to prove that these solutions are going to be significantly more, cost effective and have all these other attributes attached to them. So for folks that are not as familiar with natural and nature-based solutions, we just wanted to kind of, put one slide in here to kind of level set a little bit on that. So you can read the definition there, but these are landscape features that provide the engineering functions that you need. And typically what we're looking for is the attenuation of wave energy from surge, as well as slow the transfer of water, slowing that. So that's typically what we're looking for, but they provide these great triple bottom line, social, environmental, and economic benefits. So, you can see the kind of things that we're talking about, the dunes and the beaches, and, so that's like beach renourishment, and, more sand on the beach, and, the dunes, and, how you maintain dunes, how you grow dunes, those kind of things. And then some of the salt marshes that, you put in place, and oyster reefs, we're looking at those definitely in this area. Some of the bigger plays might be on, barrier islands. And, one of the easier things to do is maritime forests and these kind of shrub communities. And you can see some of the attributes, they, like I said, these things kind of have the engineering functionality of, knocking some energy out of these waves, and then slowing the inland transfer of them. And there's all kinds of performance factors. I won't go into the details there, but, I wanted to make sure people had a working knowledge when we talk about natural and nature-based solutions. And there's more to it, but, but these are some good examples. So let's talk about the pilots that we're looking at. We've got 4 pilot projects that we're looking at Tyndall right now. And I would say that, first you have to understand 2 of the pilots are, we want to build something and see how it does. And 2 of the projects, 3 and 4, are around, modeling studies. And I'll explain those in a minute. But, what we're really trying to do is show how these nature-based solutions can reduce the inundation from marine waters, and, we're assessing, the potential for how they can reduce these flood risks, how they perform on the landscape, and some general feasibility around construction costs, et cetera. And the sort of the local stakeholder preference for what's happening as well is very important. So you can see, this chart gets a little bit busy, but, in the aqua area along the coastline, right next to the, the base there, the orange dots, we're talking about enlarging the dunes and providing some erosion reduction measures. With the coastal ones, that's the blue, we're looking at enlarging the dunes through sand trapping. I'll give you some details on these in a minute. And then pilot 3 is around modeling sediment placement along the Gulf side and along the bay side. And then the 4th study in the yellow there is just looking at, the effectiveness of a range of different techniques, including horizontal levees. So, but there's some things that you need to think about when you start to, these pilots are very, intentionally selected. So, we wanted to think through, what was going to be the most locally relevant. And if I could, if you want to, definitely want to emphasize the importance of local relevance, right? And folks that do, strategy and planning work will tell you there's a lot of experience where, technologies work in one area, they may not necessarily work in this particular setting, and they may not be locally relevant from the perspective of what different stakeholders want to see happen too. So local relevance is a key guiding principle for what, kind of technology you think are going to work. So anyway, so, those are the pilots, and, I won't spend a lot of time on each one of these, but we'll just give you some flavor for what each one of these is about. So, pilot number 1, as I mentioned, it's enlarging the dunes right along the base there. And, we're looking at, potentially including some oyster reefs along there, and maybe some restoration of the tidal flats. Again, all of that stuff is designed to dissipate energy and stop, and reduce the flow of water coming through those areas during surge events. And, I won't belabor the point too much, but obviously there's a lot of, environmental benefits that are pretty inherently obvious with these solutions. So with pilot number 2, we're looking at, using sand trapping methods, so you can use that with sand fences, when you have a facility that has been impacted the way Tyndall's been impacted. You've got a lot of woody debris, and so that could be leveraged. And the basic concept here, the physics is, if you've got these things, the sand impacts those, slows the air down, and the sand drops out, and you start to rebuild your dunes through natural kind of processes. So we're looking at that. And then the 3rd pilot, again, this one's now a study, and we're looking at sediment placement. And we're using mud. We propose to use mud on the bay, on the East Bay side, and we propose to use sand on the Gulf side. And the idea here is, can we place these things offshore and allow the waves and the tides to kind of move that inland and place them where they need to be? There's some advantages to that approach. It's a lot less expensive, right? You know, you just come in and you offload it near shore, and you allow these natural processes to move that material into place. And you know, so it also has this effect of separating out the sediment particles. So the smaller ones move further, and you get better compaction, you know, in near shore. And some of the pebbles and things and the heavier stuff, they drop out that you don't really want in those, you know, intertidal flats. So there's, you know, and we're looking at sand on one side and mud on the other side, but that's a modeling exercise that we want to look at. So the last one is just looking at a range of things. You know, horizontal levees is one of the key things we want to look at in pilot project 4. And you know, just for those that don't know, a normal levee would be, you know, a 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 slope, let's say. These are going to be like 1 to 30, so they're real gradual. And the idea would be, as sea level rise occurs, the sea can just kind of gently walk up that, and you kind of, you're still creating some habitat and things like that. And so, you know, they're a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, a little more conducive to, you know, environmental and social co-benefits. So we're going to be looking at oyster reefs as well. I mean, I think I mentioned this, but the oyster business is a big deal in the Gulf, so that has economic importance as well as you know, helps with erosion reduction for some of these flats and things that you're putting, the sediments that you're placing. So those are the 4 pilots, and you know, there's some more work going forward. You know, I think, you know, some of the technical things on, you know, additional modeling and some cost estimating, but you know, I want to pivot now to the stakeholder process and, you know, how we're engaging stakeholders. I mentioned that at the beginning, how some of the ecosystem and habitat and environmental things you're doing can recruit, you know, the financial participation of different partners. And so what I wanted to share with you is the model that we're using to engage stakeholders. So, you know, the first thing, you know, we do is we set out to determine, you know, what our overall objective was. And our objective is the best coastal resilience solutions for the base, right? That's aligned with that broader strategy, the installation of the future. You know, so the best, and by definition, that means that the solution needs to work for the base and it needs to work for the surrounding community. So that's kind of the overall objective of this. So, you know, when we engage stakeholders, we kind of had two kind of objectives there. You know, one was align on the resilience strategy. That was an internal stakeholder, right? So when you do stakeholder engagement, some of the folks participating today or sitting in, you know, may do this work themselves, but you know, you've got to get on step 1, you've got to get really clear on, you know, who's a stakeholder, who has voice in the process, who's a potential partner. And one of the key things that we did is we really grouped them. We thought about what their potential role would be going forward. We created 3 different groups for the first round. So we had an internal group, which was, you know, just to get everybody on the same page within the organization, different functions, you know, different departments and teams. They all have different perspectives on how we're going to achieve the rebuild or how we're going to achieve the objectives that we set out for ourselves. So getting the alignment from that team is critical. But then, you know, when we identify the external partners, you know, they can provide technical advice, they can provide funding, they can provide in-kind type of things like monitoring and evaluation support. So with group 1, it was internal stakeholders. With group 2, we kind of compartmentalized local, state, and federal agencies into that group. So it was the public sector, both government and federal agencies were in that group. And then the second group, group 3, were the conservation organizations in academia. You know, they have a different angle on all of this. So you can see when we did the stakeholder mapping, we kind of laid that out. But then the engagement, you know, one of the keys here, and we felt that a couple of things were critical to success. One was that initial grouping and compartmentalization. And the reason that became very important is that we needed to show each of these organizations a line of sight to what their vision and mission is and how that they have a vested interest in nature-based coastal resilience solutions at Tyndall, right? That was very important for them to see that connection. You know, one of the guiding principles with stakeholder engagement is that, you know, in particular in building partnerships, is partners connect at the strategy level, not the project level. If you want to go do projects, those are kind of, sometimes they're hard to push, but if you can get with your partners and you can connect at the strategy level and show how you have shared strategic interests in a particular, you know, idea, that's going to engage the creativity of your different partners, and they're going to bring you ideas to say, well, have you thought about, and we can fund this, and we can do that together. So that became critical to success, and during the engagement, we also, we wanted to, make sure we gauge the level of effort, level of interest that they had, because, we had some folks that were kind of just listening and curious. That's fine. You can be that way. And then we had others that, they had significant resources to contribute, and they had a lot of influence. So, we started to kind of make sure we map them out. So you can see with the stakeholder management and partnerships, that last box there, we kind of created these categories of, stakeholders and partners, that are, it's a lighter touch. We want to communicate with them. We want them to be informed. So that could just be, community groups that are interested in what's going on. That can be, the media that may, you could pick up some positive public relations that way by keeping people informed and telling the positive story of what's going on out there. It's a very good story, and I think it really, is it's a great effort by the base, and it's, it should be recognized for being in a leadership position. And then you have other groups that are like engaged and satisfied. These are going to be stakeholders and partners, that really have more of an influential voice, that can either say no to things or they can really strongly endorse things. They may not have a lot to contribute, but they have a strong voice in the process, and they need to be satisfied. And then we have that third level, which is the people that, the organizations, I should say, that we really want to partner with. And so then we treat them differently, and there's a formal process we use for the stakeholders and partners that make it to that level. We take them into a different process where we really go through making sure we're in full alignment, because we just want, at the end of the day, you want teamwork, you want co-investment, but you want it also to be in a way where all the participating partners can point to the success and show that it really was the right investment of their time, the right investment of their efforts, and they're proud of that work too. So there's an intentional process that we employ for that. And then when you get to like, when we did this first round, in this particular case, we had about 30 different organizations spanning all those different types that I mentioned. 130 or 150 individuals were involved. And, one of the things that came out of that is, we confirmed that there is a solid support for nature-based coastal resilience solutions. That was clear across the board. We identified many grant programs that could fund this work. And so, for folks that work in the space, and I do work a lot in this space, funding comes with different eligibility requirements and things like that. So having the right portfolio of partners, because maybe the Air Force themselves can't take the grant money, but a partner that's involved on the platform, they have the right eligibility profiles, they can take the money and they can go do the work. So that became very important, but we identified many sources of money out there that can help fund this work, not only the pilots, but hopefully maybe even, help with some of the scale up of that. So, and I would just have to emphasize that the interest was across the board. We've got interest, from the regulators. They want success stories. The community is very interested and supportive. And, the conservation organizations in academia, the conservation organizations are very important because, and many of the ones that we're dealing with are very professionalized organizations, right? They understand the big picture issue. They understand the pressures of, financial ROI and all of that. But they also have a lot to offer in terms of technical advice. They can significantly increase the grantability of this work because they can take the grants and get things done. And there's a lot of power in having, organizations like the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, Conservation International, having them, be a part of your work and making sure that they like the work and they can support it. But it obviously adds to the credibility of all that performance. So that was key. So one of the things that we're looking at is this other transaction authority, OTA, and we really see that that's going to be a very viable option, for, some alternative funding and alternative delivery where we can bring these different partners together. So, this is a very important element of the overall approach. And, so I wanted to spend a little bit of extra time on that because sometimes, if you're in a technical role, you may not give this, the robust approach that it really requires. But anyways, that was the stakeholder work. It's been a very successful effort. And, one of the other guiding principles that we meant, I want to emphasize a couple of things here. One was partners connect at the strategy level, not the project level. We always have to remember that. And the second thing was we had to be clear in our objectives, but flexibility in our methods. So, you have to go into this process with, hey, this is what we have to accomplish, But that allows you, I would say, engage people in the problem and create solutions that reflect the shared vision. That becomes very important because then everybody is in, and that opens up this potential for additional funding. And the third thing we felt was really important is we had to be very transparent about the vulnerabilities, the risks that the base is facing. To say this is a serious issue, we're trying to fix it, and we're trying to build a partnership platform, and we need everybody all in on that. So those things became important guiding principles to the process. So if you're, this is the last slide. I just want to share with you that there is a website. You can see the address there. Some of the content that I went over today is there. This is going to be the digital presence for this effort going forward. There's good content there now, and we're going to continue to add content to it over time. So if you're curious, and you can check that out and learn a little bit more. But I do appreciate your attention. I know I'm going to turn it back over to the moderator. I think we've got a poll, and then we'll do some Q&A. Tamel or Get, I guess.
All right, no problem. Thank you.
I'm here. I'll go ahead and click over to the next one.
So yeah, we want to do a couple. We have a couple of questions for you. We thought we'd strike first here. But what do you consider to be the top challenge implementing coastal resilience solutions? And you can see the choices there. I don't know, Tamil, I guess, yeah, what do? Do they just click on their screen?
Yes, so I just launched a poll. They're actually answering it right now. So we're going to give them a few more seconds just to answer, and then I'll share the results.
Thank you, that sounds great. I'm curious.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and then share the results.
Wow, adequate funding. Yeah, okay, yeah. But an even spread across the issues, although the technical and engineering, there's a lot of confidence in that, but making the business case and getting alignment, those are actually, it's a little bit of a trick question because those two are interrelated, but it's about half the problem is funding and half of it's getting the business case put together and getting your organization aligned on the same approach. That's interesting outcome. Maybe the next question to know.
Yes, I'll click over to the next slide and then we'll launch the poll.
Yeah, so just curious from the folks on this call, what coastal resilience solutions are you the most comfortable with? So, is it just the gray infrastructure pieces, or are you comfortable mixing green, gray, and natural? Or if you just don't feel like you know enough right now, it's okay to say you're just not sure. But I just really would love to see where the group is on this one.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
Okay.
And now sharing the results.
Yeah, right. 75% on green, gray. All right, that's good. Well, that's great. I think Tamel and Get, I think we're ready to probably move to the, if there's anybody has any questions that have come in or comments, perhaps.
Yeah, we've got a number of questions, and I'm going to sort through them and give you what seem to be the predominant questions. Coming back on your discussion on the pilots, there were a number of questions that dealt with why are all the pilot projects planned with the nature-based resiliency strategies? Will these strategies be sustainable in the long run if implemented? And what were the procurement strategies for the pilot projects?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. And, I would say that, just to be, I want to make sure we're balanced. We are looking at integrated gray and green, and natural. So it is a full strategy there. That's, and, we want to do those pilots with the nature-based solutions to answer some of the questions that are in that question. You know, so that's the purpose of the pilots, is to look at, can these nature-based solutions, you know, we want to run the pilots with those first. I think, you know, the gray infrastructure solutions, those are pretty more direct to understand and to cost and everything, and the feasibility is easy to assess. But we want to get the viability of these nature-based solutions. You know, there is a difference in the, you know, the question kind of reveals that, you know, we do need to make sure that we also understand the dynamics of, you know, like dunes, they change their shape and height over time, and so we're aware of that. And so, you know, part of the feasibility and some of the analytics is to understand what that could look like. But, you know, we do feel like, you know, when you look at how coastlines change over time, you know, some of these techniques that we're talking about will help sort of, not totally, but it would help really lock in and firm up and keep that shape over time, because it is pretty good. That was a great question. The procurement strategy, I alluded to that, which is, you know, that's why we're looking at the OTA funding, and, you know, and building a partnership platform where different partners can take, you know, we can pursue these different grants together. You know, but we're in the process of working through all that right now.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Great question.
There are a couple of questions that are related, and they're dealing with, you know, the age-old question. You know, you got new work and you've got your existing inventory. The first question is, most of the design in the MILCON are already underway. How are these recommendations being incorporated in ongoing designs? That's one question. The other question is that love the objectives for a base rebuild. Have you looked at how we do the same for bases not under rebuild? It will take longer without dedicated funding, but would bring higher benefits.
Yeah, those are great questions. So, yeah, I think the first question, you know, that is correct. There's a lot of design work underway, and I think, you know, I'm not telling the whole story here. You know, there's a huge team involved, and so, you know, at the early stages, you know, there were, you know, performance specs, you know, performance indicators and things put together. There was agreement on, you know, using the, you know, the Miami-Dade wind loading standards, you know, and all of that. So, and I'm not as involved with the design build, you know, rebuild aspects of it, but, you know, there's design criteria packages that'll be pulled together that'll include some of these performance requirements. But we did try to get, you know, the spirit, philosophy, and some of the key indicators in early, with the recognition that you know, things were going to happen, you know, somewhat in different sequence. And as far as, you know, I personally have not been involved with more of a retrofit, you know, where it's not a total rebuild situation, and, you know, but, you know, my strategy skills would kick in on that one, and, you know, that's where, you know, you can still look at a lot of what we're talking about here is totally scalable to a facility that just needs to retrofit for coastal resilience, let's say. I don't really see that being wildly different. You know, it may have different site constraints, but I think the process that's followed here and the strategic value of it wouldn't change, but maybe some of the underlying economics would. But you know, I think these sites would be equally eligible for some of these kind of alternative funding things that we're talking about. I don't think that's not really tied to the rebuild. And, you know, we're not really using right now, we're not using MILCON money for the nature-based solutions anyway. So anyway, hopefully I've answered that question adequately.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Here's one, and I'm not sure whether this will reveal any of Jacob's trade secrets, but it's, what is Jacob's role in the work vis-a-vis the government, and how were you selected, or how was Jacob selected, and who's funding the work?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the base went through something pretty traumatic with Hurricane Michael, right? So, I mean, there was, you know, that, you know, tapped into, you know, some of the emergency funding that came to the base. So, you know, we're working, you know, in partnership with other companies for the initial phases to get this up and running. So, but, you know, our role is, you know, is bigger than what I've described here, and it's in partnership with others. And, you know, so, yeah, I don't know, you know, how much to get into on that. And it's, I'm not really, you can see I'm a strategy and technical guy. I'm not really the client account guy. So I think I'll leave my answer there. But it is a team effort. And, I have to give credit to the base because, they've been, doing just an amazing job of being, not only open-minded, but, really sharing their leadership opinions on where things need to go and endorsing a lot of what we're talking about. There's a lot of alignment here between, what the base is trying to accomplish related to the installation of the future. It's something to be really excited about. But, as always, there'll be, the realities of contracting and procurement and budgets and all of that. But, I don't get involved with all that.
Okay, Joe, we got about a minute left, but I'm going to ask you 3 specific questions because they are very specifically oriented, and hopefully you can whiz through them. First one is, what is Tyndall using for its floodplain modeling, 50-year or 100-year storm design? Second one is, please address priorities of endangered species versus security. And then the last, and I'm not saying these questions are simple, but I think they were very focused. Does Tyndall plan to implement storm water collections as a means of providing drinking water and/or landscaping operation and maintenance?
Yeah, okay, I'll try to do these quick. I know we're short on time. For the inundation modeling, we're using Jacob's flood modeler. I don't know what they're using for the stormwater model. The priority of threatened and endangered species versus security, I think actually the irony in this is that the nature-based solutions provide greater security, and they also provide, more support to threatened and endangered species. So those things are working in synergy together in the same direction. And as far as stormwater collection and rainwater harvesting and those kinds of things, I think, the green infrastructure will drive, increased water quality and, from the environmental perspective. But they've got plenty of water, quite frankly, from an infrastructure standpoint, and plenty of storage that, they don't really need to resort to rainwater harvesting for potable water. I don't believe that's in the plan for the utilities there. But definitely more reuse and more resource efficiency. But it's not a location that they need to do any rainwater harvesting for potable use purposes. Tried to do that quick. Hopefully that was okay.
Thank you, Joe. And we are just slightly over. I do want to indicate that we had more than 75% of the population stay all the way to the end. And I think that's a tribute to the interest in the subject matter. So I'm going to thank everyone for attending. Hopefully you were able to gather the tremendous amount of information from this. You've got Joe's and my point contact information. Tomeo has added up the 2 upcoming SAME events, the facility management workshop and the COVID continuity of operation in the A&E community over the next couple of months. For those of you that have not attended these virtual workshops, I got to tell you, I've done a CMAA one. I did the JETC virtual one, and I was really impressed with those, both of those, particularly the virtual JETC one. And so I would encourage you are attending these sessions. They're a great way to get exchange information and develop contacts and networks. Any last remaining words, Joe?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to share the story. I do appreciate the questions too, and and I do hope that people will reach out, share thoughts. It's kind of an open platform, and it's an important issue. It's very strategic, and so I appreciate the opportunity to have the subject on the agenda and for people participating today. And thanks for your moderation, and to Mel for your hosting as well. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Oh, yes. So I just wanted to note 1 more or 2 more things. Just wanted to reiterate that you can download today's presentation from the handout section as well as the PDH certificate. And after I end the webinar, you will be dropped off to take a short survey. We just asked you to fill that out just to give feedback on today's webinar. And thank you again, Joe. Thank you again, Get, for just sharing your time with us and your expertise. It was a very interesting subject matter today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, enjoy the rest of your day.